I'm here with Johann Hari. Johann's a British journalist. He's written for, just look him up. He's written for several publications that you'll certainly recognize. He's written 2 best-selling books, Chasing the Scream and Lost Connections. And I'm going to interview him about a new book. Johann, thanks so much for being with me.
Oh, Zach, I'm so glad to be back with you. I wish we were doing this in person like we did last time, but
yeah,
sadly the plague has kept us apart.
I know. I would have you back anytime. So I want to talk to you about anything you want, really, but of course, center it around your new book. Oh my gosh, it's right here. I finally did this, where I put the person's book. Everyone thinks I'm a narcissist for having my own books behind me and never theirs. So he wrote the new book, Stolen Focus.
Do you know, it's funny, I've only ever once seen anyone reading my book in public. And I was on a plane in Colombia, and there was a woman reading the Spanish edition of Chasing the Scream. It's called Tras el Grito. And I don't speak Spanish, right? But I see this woman, or my Spanish is abysmal. And I see this woman reading my book, and I'm so excited. I go up to her and I'm like, me disculpa, mi libro. And I'm pointing at it. And she looks at me with absolute horror and she said, no, mi libro. and I go, no. And I'm trying, there's a picture of my face on the back of it. And I'm trying to point at my face. And she's getting more and more horrified. And this guy just stands up and says, leave her alone. So I just have to sort of walk off. And this woman just thought she was being inexplicably accosted by a mad person. So
she thought she was getting mugged by...
Exactly. It was very sad. So she never found out the sad truth. So that's why. So it feels a bit weird seeing a physical example of my book there, but I'll live with it.
Okay. Yeah, you don't like that, I guess. I know you don't listen to podcasts of your own typically, and you don't really love seeing your work out in front of you.
No, it's a weird thing. In order to write a book, I have to convince myself I'm basically writing it for one person that I know and like, because I write about such personal things. And of course, I mean, there's a degree to which that's stupid and artificial. Of course, I know that people are going to read the book, but there's always this slightly disconcerting moment when the book is alive in the world. And suddenly you want to go, maybe that was a bit personal. I shouldn't have said that, and it's too late to take it back at that point. But, it makes you more candid if you don't think about it in a self-conscious way.
I know the feeling. Of course, you're on a greater scale. All right, let's get into this. Stolen focus. Who or what is stealing focus from whom? I mean, I guess lay out the groundwork for this.
Yeah, so I think we are, I reached this conclusion reluctantly, but I think we are living in a profound attention crisis. There's a small study of American college students that found that they focus on average for any one task for 65 seconds. In fact, the median amount of time they focus on a task is 19 seconds. And if anyone's listening who's not a college student and feels superior, don't. The average office worker in the United States focuses on any one task for just 3 minutes. And I think people can really feel this fracturing, this dissolving of our attention happening all around us. It's like every year that passes, tasks that require deep focus, like say reading a book, become more and more like running up an escalator that's carrying people down, right? Some people can still get to the top, but it's getting harder and harder. And for a really long time, when I felt my own attention fraying, I would blame myself. I would say, you're being weak, you're being lazy, you're being self-indulgent, you need to pull yourself together. But actually, in the research for my book, I traveled all over the world, from Rio to New Zealand, from Miami to Moscow, interviewing the leading experts in the world about what causes attention problems, in fact, what causes attention generally. And I learned that there's scientific evidence for 12 different factors that can make attention worse. And a broad array of them are rising at the moment, have been rising for some time. And they range really widely. Mostly we think about, technology, and there are aspects of our current technology we use that are degrading our attention. But actually they range really widely, from the food we eat to the air we breathe, from the hours we work to the hours we don't sleep. And I think we need to see this increasingly. I think the evidence suggests we should see this not as a personal failing on my part or your child's part. If your child struggles to focus, we should in fact see it as the reality, which is that our attention is being stolen from us by very powerful forces. And if we want to get our attention back, which I believe is an urgent necessity, partly there are things we can do as isolated individuals, but much more we need to take on the forces that have stolen our focus and reclaim it.
That sounds hyper daunting until you get into the chapters. Can you? I don't know how you want to do that, because I know a lot of people don't like, especially because this is a book that by the time people hear this, it'll have just been published. I don't know if you want to go through chapter by chapter, but maybe we'll take away some keynotes of the book so that we can talk about isolated problems and then strategies to them.
Sure.
One thing that caught me right away was one of the first examples that you gave of just noticing the issue that there's so many things competing for our attention all at once, and that our actions don't necessarily meet our longer term values or motivations, what we really want. You mentioned, you're trying to watch your food intake, and you try to use a strategy that's akin to tying yourself to the masthead. And you found that has utility, but I think that was for me, I don't know if this is how you meant to write it, but that's like, I feel like that's the first thing that people go to is how can I keep it so that these things that entice me, that I don't want to be doing in excess, can sort of have distance from me. That's kind of like the tier one logic of how to solve this kind of a problem. And if you mentioned it had some success, and there's some literature on why it's successful, but it's just one step of so many to go. And so maybe we could start there.
Yeah, so this is a concept. Professor Molly Crockett at Yale is someone I interviewed at this, who's done a lot of research on this. So this is a concept called pre-commitment. And it's really simple. If you don't want to eat Pringles, you should not buy them and not have them in your home, right? Because what we tend to do is we buy Pringles and go, oh, I'll just be able to discipline myself. I'll have a few today, a few tomorrow, a few the day after. So pre-commitment is where the present tense you that has all these ambitious goals, I want to not eat Pringles, I want to not use my phone all night, binds the future version of you, right? Locks in the future version of you. So a simple example would be not buying the Pringles, but there are other ways you can bind yourself. And one of the things I did for the book that was hard, but I thought was necessary and taught me a lot, but not quite what I expected to learn, was the form of pre-commitment I did right at the start of the research for the book. Well, I just felt my attention was really collapsing. I felt terrible when I looked at the younger people in my life who I felt were going through the same. And I thought, I'm just tired of being wired in this way. I'm going to take 3 months completely without the internet or any smartphone. So I went to a place in Cape Cod called Provincetown, which is a little town at the very tip of Cape Cod. And I rented a room, and I just didn't have the internet or a smartphone for 3 months, which was a very drastic form of, I literally left my phone in Boston, right? I was like, and I got, in case I went crazy and bought something, I even got the people I rented the room from to remove the modem from the room. I was trying to do everything I could to lock in my future self. And that whole experience taught me a lot.
The reason I bring that up first is because, and not ask you to define sort of the landscape of the problem, is because that I think that when you say something like people are focusing less than ever, but a tendency might be to point to a smartphone, just a phone in general. And so that's the logical way out of this is to limit your smartphone use. But of course, you define the problem as much larger than this. It's deeply embedded cultural attitude that's in the warp and the woof of our lives.
That's interesting, because my initial response was exactly that, to think, God, this is the result of the smartphone. And there are definitely aspects of this technology that, or rather the design of the technology, that are screwing with our ability to focus and pay attention. But actually, I learned that this is a problem that goes deeper than personal failing or just one new invention. It's actually a very broad problem. We can absolutely deal with those causes. We can deal with them one by one. Some of them can be dealt with at the individual level, but more they need to be dealt with both at the individual level and collectively. So I'll give you an example with some of the ways this technology, some of the habits this technology has created that degrade our attention, that I kind of experienced myself the relief from in Provincetown, and then obviously interviewed leading experts. So one of the experts I interviewed was a man named Professor Earl Miller, who's one of the world's leading neuroscientists, professor of neuroscience at MIT. And he said to me, one thing you absolutely have to understand about how the human brain works is that we can only consciously think about one thing at a time. This is just a limitation of the human mind. The human brain has not significantly changed in 40,000 years. You can only think about one thing at a time. But we have told ourselves, we've fallen for a kind of mass delusion, which is we believe we can think about many things at the same time. Professor Larry Rosen did a study that found that the average American teenager believes they can follow 6 forms of media simultaneously, 6 or 7. So what we did to justify this belief, this illusion, is we took a term from computing, we took the term multitasking, right? Which computers can do. Computers have more than one processor. They can do 2 things simultaneously. We took that term and applied it to ourselves. But this has come with a really massive cost. So what scientists like Professor Miller's colleagues did is they used to think, well, maybe multitasking is possible. Maybe people can do lots of things at once. So they would get them in labs and they would get them to do more than one thing at once. And they would watch them and see what happened. They'd monitor them. And what they discovered was when you think you're doing 2 things at once, you're actually juggling one thing and another thing.
Right.
And when you do that, and your consciousness papers over it, to give a seamless impression of consciousness. But what happens is this comes with a series of really significant costs. Firstly, there's what's called the switch cost effect, which is, so if I'm talking to you now, Zach, and my phone is hidden somewhere in this room, if I just glanced at my phone and I glanced at a text message, I think, it takes 2 seconds to look at a text message, and I look back at you, there's a cost where I have to reassemble my thoughts, like, oh wait, what was Zach saying? What am I saying to Zach? Right? That takes a significant amount of your bandwidth. The second cost is a sort of a screw up effect. It's where if I do that, I will start to make mistakes and I have to then go and correct my mistakes, right? So that takes even more of your bandwidth to do that. The third is that it affects your memory. So to encode experiences into memory takes a certain amount of mental energy, right? Mental space and mental energy. If your mind is jammed up with switching, what was this? What was that? What was on Facebook? What did he just say? What's on the television there? You get less mental space to encode your thoughts into memory. So your memory gets worse. And over time, and this is a more medium and long-term problem if you're switching all the time, you become less creative. Because creativity comes from letting your mind wander, from it making connections between different things you've seen, experienced, and thought in your lives. And that's where originality comes from, combining these things. If your mental space is just jammed up in this way, you get much less creativity. The way Professor Miller put it to me was, we live in a perfect storm of cognitive degradation as a result of these forms of distraction. And this is a really significant effect. There was a small study by Hewlett-Packard, the people who make printers, where they got a sort of group of workers and they split them into 2 groups. So one group was told, just do your work and you're not going to receive any emails or phone calls. And the second group was told, do your work, and they interrupted them a lot with email and phone calls. Not like some insane amount, but a fairly normal amount. And they tested their IQ. The distracted workers on average performed 10 points worse on IQ tests than the workers who were allowed to just do one thing. To give you a sense of that, if you smoke weed, if you get stoned, it generally lowers your IQ by about 5 points while you're stoned, right? So you are twice the effect. When you're distracted, that's twice the effect of being stoned. You'll be better off sitting at your office smoking a spliff and only doing one thing than sitting at your desk not smoking cannabis but being distracted all the time. There was a similar study at Carnegie Mellon University where they took 138 students and they split them into 2 groups. They got them to sit an exam, a real exam. And one group was told, just do the exam like normal exam conditions. And the second group was told, you can receive text messages during this exam. That was all the only difference. The people who received text messages did on average 20% worse than the people who received no text messages. Now we are all losing that amount of bandwidth. And actually, if your screen time most of us, because we're exposed to these constant distractions, and actually, so if your screen time shows that you're, spending 2 hours a day on your phone, you're actually losing a lot more than that in just atrophied focus. Michael Posner is a professor at the University of Oregon, found that if you're distracted, it takes on average 23 minutes to get back to the same level of focus that you had prior to the interruption. So a lot of us are just bouncing from distraction to distraction to distraction, constantly running at this kind of diminished level of brain power.
Just to reflect, so if you feel as though you're multitasking, but you're really context switching, and that's just your MO. I mean, that's what you do day in and day out. I mean, you took the example of, let's break it down to 2 tasks at a time. It dilutes the 2 different things you're trying to pay attention to some lesser version of themselves, or at least you're spending less attention to each of those things. Your experience becomes you get a less full experience for each of those things. You mentioned that this is something that we're doing all the time, right? That we have distractions daily, and it's not just 2, it's several, and it can be hard to decide what are things just needlessly competing for our attention, and how are some of these things the ways that we just need to operate in the world now. And so that would offer, as I think you try to parse out in your book, 2 different sets of solutions. One would be, how do I individually change my behavior so that I'm more focused? And the other would be, how do we create a culture in which we stop degrading our sense of experience?
I think you're exactly right. And I'll give you an example of a social solution that we can fight for that I think really helps us to understand the distinction between individual solutions and social solutions. There's lots of individual solutions I can talk about. But in France in 2016, they had a big problem with what they call le burnout, which you maybe probably don't need me to translate. And this was becoming a really big issue for the French economy. So the French government at the time, the government of François Hollande, appointed a man named Bruno Metling, who was the head of Orange, which is the biggest telecom company in France, or one of the biggest. And they said, look, just figure out what's going on here. So they did loads of research. They discovered that 1/3 of French workers felt they could never unplug from the internet and their phones. Like never, and I don't just mean during work hours, ever, because work texts and emails could come in at any time and they were expected to respond to them, and they were penalized, at least unofficially, if they didn't respond to them, right? So people were just becoming exhausted. You want to spend time with your child, but you can't ever not have a little bit of your brain on, oh shit, what's happening with the phone, right? So, and this was, causing illness. It was making people less effective at work. It was just a lousy situation. So Metling issued a report, which the French government then introduced into law, saying that every worker should have what was called a right to disconnect. And what that means is very simple. Everyone has a right to written down work hours, clearly defined work hours, and they have the right, when those work hours are finished, to not have to look at their phone or answer work calls. Right? That's it. And it's been introduced in France. I've interviewed people in Paris about it. It's had a significant effect in France. Companies are fined if they expect their workers. Rent-A-Kill, for example, was fined 70,000 euros because they tried to penalize a worker complaining that he hadn't answered his emails outside his designated work hours. It's had a significant effect, right? Now you can see, I think, and that's one of many changes that we need. But I remember when I was a kid, the only people who were on call were doctors or the prime minister, right? Or the president, right? Now, half the economy is basically on call all the time, right? And I think what this shows us, and where I think my book is a bit different to some other books about attention, is look, we can give people all the self-help bromides that we like. We can tell people, think about that. It's good for you to unplug. It's good for you to switch your phone off, right? But in the current economy we have, to me, that's like walking up to a homeless person and saying, you know what would make you feel much better would be if you went over there into that fancy hotel and you had a really nice dinner. And they're going to go, well, yeah, fuck you. I know that. I can't do that, right? There's no point telling people. At the moment, we live in a gap between what we know we should do and what we feel we can do. Now, there are lots of things about attention we may not know, and I'm not saying we know everything already. But what we need to do is close that gap, right? And there's all sorts of practical things we can do to close that gap. But a lot of them, we've got to be honest, require concerted collective action, as well as individual changes. And they're not enemies either, by the way. I'm in favor of a huge number of individual changes. I've made a lot myself. I talk about the individual changes we can make in the book. but we also need to deal with the collective problem.
It's funny. I finally got around to watching one of your interviews with Joe Rogan, and you sort of had this argument, not an argument about individual solutions versus cultural solutions, where he was staunchly saying, "Yeah, but the individual." And your response was, "Yeah, but also culture."
And I like Joe, and to his credit, he did actually listen to me, and it was a really interesting conversation, because I do think what Joe, and I like him very much as a person, and I think he's I disagree with him on some things and agree on others, but I like him as a force in public life, and I think a lot of the criticisms directed towards him, some are legitimate, but a lot of them are just snobbery. But it was really interesting, because I think what Joe was doing was saying what a lot of people in our culture think. Right, we are constantly trained to think that our problems are individual problems. And I'm certainly not immune to this. I mean, I think about Provincetown, where I go on this very extreme individual solution. And while I was there, I had such an improvement in attention. And I thought, this is going to be the rest of my life, right? And then within a few weeks of going back to the connected world, internet-enabled world, I was as bad as I'd ever been, within a few months. And I remember going to interview in Moscow, Dr. James Williams, who is a former Google engineer and a really remarkable person, one of the most interesting thinkers about attention in the world. And he said to me, "But Johann, the mistake you made is a digital detox is not the solution for the attention problems we face, for the same reason that wearing a gas mask is not the solution to air pollution," right? Sure, wear a gas mask if you want, it might help. But we need to stop the people who are emitting the air pollution. We need to make it possible for people to not create air pollution, right? That's the enduring solution. Of course, do what you can to insulate yourself as an individual. And there's no, I don't accept that as a dichotomy, right?
Right.
It's both and, it's not either or.
I'm going to go back to
have this. I know you very much think this way as well, Zach, so I'm not telling you anything you don't already know.
No, absolutely. No, but there's a, third member of the audience, so to speak, out there. So we got to, I just bookmarked this point because I thought it was important, going back to the way that you laid out some of the problems that we're facing. Not only are there negative consequences in our own attention down the road if we're trying to figure out, trying to prioritize which takes our attention when, and we're, experiencing a deluge of distracting, I guess, noise all the time. So much so that it seems like answering text messages, despite not being able to attend to our family, as I've experienced, by the way, I'm sure they're starting to compete with each other, even though there's some obvious winners in those situations. But not only that, we also experience less creativity. You either mentioned in the book or maybe just now. Experience less mind wandering, experience less creativity, experience less flow, if those things compound over time. And I'd love it if you could talk about some of those things and why they're so crucial.
Yeah. So flow, I've been thinking about this a lot the last few days, because the man who discovered this concept, an amazing man named Hari, who I interviewed in Claremont in California, sadly just died recently, a few days ago. But he was an incredible man. So there's an amazing story about his life that I tell in the book, but to give you the kind of core of it. So everyone listening will have experienced a flow state at some point in their life. A flow state is when you're doing something and you're really in it, right? So let's say for me, it would be writing. Someone listening, it might be playing the guitar, or it could be a whole range of things. You're in it, you're rock climbing, whatever it is. You're doing something that's really meaningful to you, and time seems to fall away, your ego seems to fall away, and you just are the thing you're doing, right? One rock climber said it's you become the rock you're climbing, right? And this is very important because this is called a flow state. Hari was the first person to identify that this is a universal psychological phenomenon. Almost everyone experiences it at some point in their life, and it seems to exist in every culture. And the reason it's so important for attention is flow states are a sort of gusher of attention that exist in all of us, where you can pay attention for really long periods of time and it feels effortless. When you're in a flow state, it's not like studying a book for a text or a test for something where you have to really make yourself focus, right? It's a deep form of focus. It's the deepest form of focus human beings can produce. So Mihaly did a lot of research over 40 years, an incredible body of research, to figure out how do human beings get into flow states and how do they maintain them, and also what disrupts them. And he found that there were many things he discovered about it, but for me, the three biggest headlines were, firstly, you have to have one clear goal for what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do lots of things at the same time, that will kill flow, right? If I'm not a painter, but if I painted a canvas, if I was painting a canvas, if I was a painter and I'm in flow and I'm being interrupted by text messages, my flow will die, right? So you've got to be doing one thing. That thing has got to be meaningful to you, right? It's got to be a goal that matters to you. So for me, painting a canvas wouldn't get me into flow because I can draw stick men and that's about it, right? Or playing the guitar would not get it to me because I would sound like, a cat being tortured to death. So it's got to be, for me, it's writing, but for other people, it'd be other things. It's got to be meaningful to you. And crucially, it's got to be it helps if it's at the edge of your abilities. If it's something you've done before, but you're pushing yourself, right? So if you were a mountaineer, if you're a middle ranking mountaineer, climbing the wall in your garden is not going to get you into flow, but probably climbing Mount Everest won't get you into flow either because it's so daunting. You don't want to be too easy or too daunting. You want to be in the sweet spot of it's slightly challenging. So a mountain that's a little bit higher and harder than the one you climbed before. When those three factors are in place, flow will likely come. But as Mihaly discovered, flow is very fragile. And the thing that kills flow is one of the things that kills flow is disruptions. Interruptions. If you're interrupted, if you're disrupted, your flow states die. And I argued to him, and he strongly agreed, that we are living in a crisis of flow states, right? And flow is a force that makes us achieve at our best. So I think you really feel that. It helped me to understand why when I'm chronically distracted, I don't just feel irritated, I feel in some way diminished, because I think when you're deprived of flow, you sort of become like a stump of what you might have been. You can sense there's more you could have done, but somehow it's been sort of atrophied. And I do think that the culture of distraction in which we live, I think there's good evidence. And in fact, Mihaly showed the single biggest disruptor of flow is just screens, You
also mentioned something about the reinforcement that we get from being on social media, I guess, specifically. So you take Instagram, for example, and you're putting out some sort of content somewhere, or I guess it's just social media in general, in hopes that somebody will quasi recognize you or give you some sense of acknowledgement, a like, a share, and you count how many you get, and you can really, there's a terrible notion associated with that you are actually starting to do things at random, hoping for this positive reinforcement to what you're doing, and you start to forget that there's any reason why you're putting something out there, and that's antithetical to something like a flow state. If you could touch on that sort of reinforcement.
Yeah. So Mihaly was really in conflict. And I think this is one of the defining conflicts of our time to understand one of the crises we face, with a psychologist, I know you know his work, B.F. Skinner. So B.F. Skinner was the most influential American psychologist of his generation. And the school of philosophy, the school of psychology he was part of, he didn't create it, but became by far the most defining figure in it, was called behaviorism. And at its core, it's extremely simple, and anyone listening can try at home one of the foundational experiments of behaviorism. Very simple. Get a pigeon, put it in a cage with a bird feeder. And it has to be a bird feeder you can activate from outside the cage. Wait until so pigeons wander around the whole time. They peck, they do whatever they do. Wait until the pigeon does some random thing. Choose it in advance. Let's say lifting its left wing. When it lifts its left wing, release some birdseed into the cage. Pigeon will eat it, then wait. Sooner or later, it will raise its left wing again. As soon as it does that, release more bird feed. Keep reinforcing the behavior of lifting its left wing. Do that 5, 6, 8 times. The pigeon will start obsessively lifting its left wing, right? It will start doing it all the time because it's learned that that's what it gets rewarded for. That's what it's reinforced for. Skinner wanted to see how far you could push this principle about reinforcements and rewards. Turns out you can push it really far. You can teach a pigeon to play ping pong. You can teach a rabbit to pick up coins and put them in a piggy bank. You can teach a pig to vacuum a house. You can go really far. And Skinner came to believe, and he took it way too far, but Skinner came to believe that this was the core of human behavior as well, that you could determine and manipulate a person by giving them a series of arbitrary rewards. You could make people focus on things that were actually meaningless to them if you rewarded them in the right way. This philosophy, behaviorism, and the work of B.F. Skinner in particular, was at the core of the design of a website named Instagram, right? Mike Krieger, one of the co-founders of Instagram, studied B.F. Skinner's work closely. And if you look at, I remember when I was in Provincetown, and you'd see these men all the time who were just constantly walking around town. It was mostly men. I mean, it's a gay town, mostly gay male town. You would see people walking around who were just constantly looking for opportunities to take selfies, right? And there would always be, it would be a very similar facial dance. What they do is they would take a picture of themselves and they would do a really big smile as they were doing the picture. As soon as the picture was taken, their face would drop and they would look miserable. And they would post the image on Instagram. And then they would sit there and you would see them waiting while the likes and rewards came in. And then they would do a small smile, but it was never as big as the smile in the picture, right? And I would think, God, you are basically one of Skinner's pigeons, but with a six-pack and a pina colada, right? So we live in a culture that is dominated by the technologies that were created by B.F. Skinner. But there is a totally rival, and it's true that Skinner had some insight, right? He understood that we will pay attention to things that are arbitrary based on rewards. But as Mihaly said, that's just one very cramped, dark view of what human beings are. Human beings are much more than that. And so flow states, you know, the kind of fragmentation that comes from constant reward seeking shrinks you. It makes you shallower. It makes you more narcissistic. It makes you more angry. But flow states make you bigger. They make you less egotistical, more open to the world, more open to other people. And in a sense, you know, I think about Mihaly spent so much of his life studying painters, right? Watching painters as they work. This is one of the key moments when he makes this breakthrough with flow states, is observing painters. And I think, who do we want to be? Do you want to be one of B.F. Skinner's pigeons, arbitrarily dancing to somebody else's tune? Or do you want to be one of Mihaly's painters, focusing in a very deep and creative way on something that actually matters to them? And in a way, we're living in a culture that's tugging us all the time towards being one of B.F. Skinner's pigeons, but we don't have to live like this, right? This is a very new way of living and thinking. We can break from this dystopian logic if we want to.
You know, you've written about addiction and the sort of one-dimensional thinking about what human beings are by people who aim to solve addiction, that it's a brain disease. And you have to, in order to make that view stick and actually work in any way, you have to see humans as one-dimensional. Although you can't really fulfill that. That doesn't work out. But that's how, when I've written about Nora Volkow, and now a bugaboo of mine is Anna Lembke, who talks about that, you know, it's addiction is a disease. It hijacks your brain and it just creates these reinforcements and you just can't get over them. So in some ways, I'm extremely optimistic, since I see human beings as so multidimensional and complex in a beautiful way. And that's what you're saying is is what people perhaps are being less and less capable of seeing about themselves, that they are so multidimensional and there's more to life than this series of sort of reinforcements.
Yeah, I think you're totally, and I just want to say you've done such excellent work on Nora Volkow, and you're absolutely right. And there's a guy called Professor David Purple, who's at NYU, who I interviewed, a neuroscientist. He says, you know, the way neuroscience, the dominant way of talking and thinking about neuroscience at the moment is really behaviorist. It's really Skinnerian. Right. It's incredibly reductionist, simplistic. You know, Skinner literally, this sounds like it can't be true, but he literally said that people don't have minds. They are just the sum total of the rewards and reinforcements that they receive, right? We believe we have a mind, but that's merely an illusion. We're just the product of our reinforcements. And Nora Volkow and the other neuroscientists who talk about addiction, I mean, it's pretty close to that, right? That we're just sort of these sort of, it's an extraordinarily reductionist way of thinking about the brain and who we are. So I really strongly agree with you on that.
So this is where you're going to have to tease it apart for me. So you mentioned Tristan Harris, which I was glad to see he made it in your book. I actually, at this point, I guess you probably couldn't have written the book without mentioning him.
He's such an amazing, I mean, I really deeply admire him. I think he's an incredible person.
He's done great work. And so this is like as I say, I'm optimistic that people are more than just responses to reinforcement. Yet I feel Tristan is worried that people are being manipulated in a way that sends them reinforcements for things that go against perhaps their best interest, and they're doing so unwittingly. What keeps you or him, I guess, from being optimistic that we can't get over that, us being humans and all? Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, if we're more than the behaviorists say, we should be able to get over these circumstances. And I guess I should ask first, I have the curse of knowledge here. Perhaps you should introduce who Tristan Harris is, because I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, so Tristan Harris is a remarkable person. He was a kind of wunderkind at Google. He worked on the Gmail team. And there's this incredible moment, I always think, when Gmail was being designed and he was working there. And they already, I mean, it was well into the design of Gmail. It was in many tens of millions of people were using it. And he was at the Googleplex. And somebody said, I don't think Googleplex existed then as it currently is, but the Google HQ. And somebody said, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we make it so that whenever anyone gets an email, their phone vibrates? And everyone said, oh, that's a good idea. And Tristan just describes a week later walking around San Francisco and just hearing this vibration everywhere and realizing that was happening all over the world. And that, in fact, within a year, Gmail was responsible for 11 billion interruptions to people's day across the world, right? So Tristan was at the heart of this machine and became increasingly uncomfortable with it, and became initially outspoken within the company in an incredibly brave way, and then became their first design ethicist. So basically was given a position to think about ethics, and then just realized that with the business model that these companies currently have, they cannot be ethical, that it requires the business model to be challenged. We can talk about that.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? He was a design ethicist, and so does that imply does that just already imply that an ethicist is needed? I find that interesting that they would hire. I mean,
this is me speaking, not Tristan. I don't think he would put it as. I don't think he would say this, but the truth is, I think he basically did a presentation inside the company saying, this is crazy what we're doing to people. We are destroying the world's attention, and we need to change how we do it. And this went so viral within the company that I think Google just gave him this position to shut him up and make him think he was being taken seriously. Now, that could, I don't know that, and I don't think Tristan would say that. So I want to caveat that a bit, but that's essentially what I think. Given that they didn't listen to anything he recommended and didn't do anything he said, I sort of think that's what happened, but I could be wrong. Or it may be that they were sincere, but then they realized the limitations within their business model of what they could do. That's the more generous way of thinking about it. Either way, Tristan became, and I interviewed other Silicon Valley dissidents as well, became a key figure in explaining how this increasingly invasive technology is trashing our attention, and indeed is explicitly and consciously designed to invade our attention. And that's important to understand. Your distraction is their fuel, and we can talk about how. But also, for me, much more optimistically, talking about how social media does not have to work this way, right? It's
Hmm.
an analogy I think about all the time. It was explained to me by Jaron Lanier, who's another kind of key Silicon Valley dissident and a great guy. We used to paint our homes with lead paint for ages, from the 1920s till the 1970s. And then it was discovered that exposure to lead through lead paint really damages your attention, and particularly children's ability to pay attention, and has all sorts of other negative effects. So we banned the lead in paint. We still paint our houses, right? I'm in a room that's been painted, you're in a room that's been painted, but there isn't lead in it anymore. And there's a very similar phenomenon with social media. So it's not inherent. There would have been some increased distraction inherent in any model of social media, but we have got a model of social media that maximally distracts people. And it's for a very simple reason. It's not because the people at Google or Facebook or Twitter are sort of Bond villains who want to distract us. That's not why. For a much more basic reason. If I pick up my phone now and I open Facebook, Facebook starts to make money for two reasons. Firstly, because I'll see ads as I scroll down. That's the obvious one, right? We all understand the principle of advertising. But secondly, and actually of more value to them, is that everything you do on Facebook is selected and sorted, right? To create a profile of you, a very detailed profile of you, whether you like a post, messaged your mom about diapers, whatever it might be. All of that information is gathered and sorted to create a profile of you that they then sell on to advertisers. So advertisers can target you as precisely as possible, right? Every time you put down your phone, it starts to lose those two revenue streams every time. This is why it's really helpful to think about, why is there no button on Facebook that says, which of my friends is nearby and would like to meet up, right? Facebook will tell you loads of things. It'll tell you if there's been a terrorist attack, if your friends have logged in safe. It'll tell you people's birthdays. It'll tell you what you said on exactly that day 10 years before. It will not give you that button. Now, why would that be? That button would undoubtedly be very popular with its users, right? Who wouldn't want sometimes to use that button? The reason it won't give it to you is because then you would put your phone down. If it said, oh, Joe wants to go for a drink and he's round the corner, great, I'll go see Joe. You would turn your phone off. And for them, every moment you turn your phone off, every time you close the app, is a financial disaster, right? Their model, so they have to design their technology based on that business model to maximally invade and hold your attention. That's how they make money, right? That's how they grow every year, by distracting more and more people. But that didn't have to be the business model for social media, and it doesn't have to be the business model now. Asa Raskin, another key figure who actually made a breakthrough that changed how the internet worked, and had worked for these companies, said to me, very bluntly, his dad was the person who designed, Jeff Raskin was the guy who designed the Apple Macintosh for Steve Jobs, just said to me, we can just ban surveillance capitalism. It's just inhuman to have a business model that's designed on monitoring you, raiding your attention, and selling profiles of you to advertisers. Just ban it, right? And I was like, well, what would happen next? What happens the day after we ban it when I open Facebook? And there's plenty of other alternative models that are far less attention hacking. One is subscription. It might be like Netflix. We pay a small amount of money every month. One is, it might be like the sewer systems, right? Anyone listening to this, you are sitting somewhere near a sewage system that is owned by you and other taxpayers. That's how the sewers work, right? We own the pipes. It may be that we want to have a system where we own the informational pipes as well as the sewage pipes. We own the sewage pipes because if we didn't, there would be outbreaks of cholera and all sorts of problems. And maybe we want to own the informational pipes because we're getting the attentional equivalent of cholera and actually some of the political equivalents of cholera. It may be we want that to be owned by the public but independent of government, like the BBC, the most respected media institution in the whole world. There's a whole array of things. But once the financial incentives have changed, then Facebook ceases to be, at the moment, as Tristan puts it, you can try and put your phone down, but there's 1,000 engineers at the other side of the screen trying to get you to pick it up again. That suddenly changes. At the moment, as Tristan puts it, Facebook is built around figuring out how to raid your attention. After we change the business model, it can be about figuring out your intentions. What do you want? Do you want something that will help you heal your ability to pay attention? Okay, it can be designed around that, right? Instead of being a vacuum sucking up your attention, it can be a trampoline pushing you back into the world with better information. It's a very different model. Now, it's entirely just as technologically easy as the current Facebook we have. It's just the incentives aren't there to create it. Now, again, the only way we're going to change those incentives is through a movement that demands it, that holds these companies accountable and demands it, right? They're never going to hand that down from on high. They're not going to do that themselves any more than the lead industry was going to, prevent using lead paint on its own, or any industry is going to, go against its own short-term interest. They don't any more than ExxonMobil is going to, out of concern for the climate crisis, stop, drilling for fossil fuels. These companies have to be made to do these things. But absolutely, that's achievable. And again, a big systemic change that has to happen.
Have you talked to anybody who's of the persuasion that somebody smarter than me could talk to execs of Facebook who run the marketing campaigns and sufficiently convince them that it would be an actually more lucrative, better, for whatever better means, business model to hone in on people's intentions, as you say? Like perhaps there's a way in which this actually, they're longer lasting and a better business model for doing things completely ethically. And I wonder what it would take to change that.
Well, this isn't a hypothetical. So in the wake of the election of President Trump and the victory of Brexit in Britain, Facebook set up an internal group of data scientists, their own data scientists, to look at, were we responsible for this? And we now know, because it was leaked by Frances Haugen, what that internal report said. So they came back and they said, we are responsible. Our model inherently polarizes and divides and angers people. I can talk about why if you like. And they said, this is absolutely inherent to our business model. They didn't talk about attention, but that's also inherent to the business model. This is inherent to our business model. And the only solution would be for us to abandon our current business model and choose what they called an anti-growth strategy for Facebook. So their own data scientists, after looking at the data, said that the growth of Facebook was inextricably bound with these forces of polarization and division. And the Wall Street Journal report on this had a very dry sentence. They described that, and then they said, after reading the report, Mark Zuckerberg said that he should never be brought any report like this ever again, right? These people are never going to, that report found there were actually two reports, internal reports, and it might have been the other one, but one of the two internal reports found that a third of all the people who joined neo-Nazi groups in Germany, a country with some history with Nazism, had joined it because they were specifically recommended it by the Facebook algorithm. A third, right? They didn't even act then. If they're not going to act when they're told that they're promoting Nazism in Germany, I don't believe they're going to act on these things of their own accord. But they can be made to act on it, right? They can be regulated. There's all sorts of regulations that can be imposed. And this grotesque business model can be outlawed.
Fair enough. You talked about the ways in which social media giants are intentionally dividing people. And I guess that's sort of apropos what you say about hypervigilance and why, we adopt more stress than perhaps we need to, and we focus more of our attention on stressors and how to solve immediate problems than we need to. And that might be a good next place to go.
Yeah, so there's this quirk. So, but as we've just been talking about, Facebook want to keep you scrolling because the longer you keep scrolling, the more money you make. So they have algorithms that are designed, their algorithms are designed solely with that purpose in mind. They change, they tweak, but that's their goal, right? And unfortunately, there's a quirk of human psychology. It's called negativity bias. There's lots of evidence for it, which is basically we will look at something that is worrying and angering longer than we will look at something that is reassuring and calming. So anyone who's ever driven on the motorway, on the highway, and seen a car accident will know that effect. You stare at the car accident longer than you stare at the pretty flowers on the other side of the road, right? Very good evolutionary reason. It makes more sense for you to stare at things that might endanger you than things that don't endanger you, for obvious reasons. The people who stared at the things that endangered them were more likely to notice they were in danger and survive and become our ancestors. Negativity bias goes very deep. 10-week-old babies will stare longer at an angry face than at a friendly face for precisely that reason. But that produces it's not the intention of anyone at Facebook or any of the other social media sites, but it produces a horrendous effect, which is that it means that the algorithm designed to keep you scrolling will start feeding you things that make you angry and upset. It will anger you. The goal of these websites is to be in what they call engaging. If it's enraging, it's engaging, right? They want to keep you scrolling. They're going to feed you angrier and angrier things. This is why, for example, a guy called Guillaume Chasselot, who worked for YouTube, revealed how the YouTube algorithm worked. If you click on, and again, this wasn't the intention, it was their sole goal is to keep you scrolling. So if you watch, for people who don't know, if you watch a video on YouTube, it'll often recommend another video. If you watched a normal video about the Holocaust, just a factual history video, within a chain of 3 or 4 recommendations, it would be recommending you Holocaust denial videos. If you watched a normal news documentary about 9/11, within 3 or 4 videos, it would be recommending so-called 9/11 truther documentaries, or documentary is not the right word, deception. If you watched a diet video, pretty soon it would be recommending pro-anorexia videos. So wherever you start, as Tristan puts it, wherever you start, it makes you crazier, right? So this is very this is a key part. There's many things going on, of course, it's one of many, but this is a key factor in why we're seeing so much dangerous polarization and this rage that you see all around you, right? Now, there's many factors going on, but we're seeing this bolstering of anger, and that has an effect on attention. It's obviously dangerous for lots of reasons, but since we're talking about attention, firstly, when you're angry, you can pay attention less well. There's lots of research on this. You're slightly better for a short period at paying attention to the thing that's angering you, but your overall attention deteriorates. But also, it creates a sense that you're in danger. If you're surrounded by angry people, or appear to be, and I would argue you are literally surrounded by more angry people, because it does actually make people angry. It's not just the appearance of anger. That can trigger a psychological state that I talked about a lot with Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's the Surgeon General of California, a state called vigilance and hypervigilance. So imagine you were attacked by a bear, right? In the weeks that followed, you would spend a lot more of your time scanning the horizon for risks, even if you rationally know a bear's not coming back. So less of your attention would go on the thing in front of you, more of your attention would go on scanning for danger. Imagine you were then attacked by a bear again, or one of your neighbors was attacked by a bear. You would flip into a state called hypervigilance, where you are obsessively scanning for dangers. And actually, it would be very hard for you to then pay what we think of as deep attention. Your attention has flipped to searching for risk, right? Dr. John Giardini, who's a child psychiatrist in Adelaide in Australia, where I interviewed him, said to me, when you're safe, deep focus is a very good strategy. When you're in danger, deep focus is a very foolish strategy, because the bear might just come and swipe you if you're sitting there reading a book, right? And because it increases the amount of anger and increases the amount of threat you appear to be exposed to, it can often trigger a vigilant state that also corrodes your ability to pay attention and focus.
And in so many cases, just a superficial vigilance state. I guess that's redundant when you say hypervigilant. That's sort of what you mean. You're
so there's kind of low level vigilance, and then it goes all the way up to hypervigilance. And one of the reasons I don't look at social media is because it makes me feel so vigilant, right? Partly because people are being horrible about you. They're incentivized to be horrible about you. So it it gives you the sense that you're being attacked, personally attacked, if you're even vaguely in the public eye. But more than that, it gives you a sense that you're just in a horrible, it's like going into a really rough dive bar, where people are being, beaten up at the other side of the bar, right? And that corrodes your ability to pay attention, because if you feel that you're in a rough, dangerous environment, you're going to really struggle with that. I just need to put on my heater. Yeah, sorry.
It's that segues nicely into a discussion you had with Lenore Skenazy. Lenore's the president of Let Grow, and maybe you can talk a little bit about who she is. People will have seen my interview with her, and she just, again, she's a person who kind of takes the terms that are the concerns that are at the tip of so many people's tongues and expresses them in a meaningful way. And she talks about how parents are hypervigilant with respect to their children and their safety, to the extent that they have this false sense of the need to keep them safe, to keep their arms around them. And that has the consequence of children not being ready for the world, not exploring, not playing. And I hope that you'll talk about that, because I promised her that I would mention on my interview with you.
I absolutely love Lenore. She's one of my heroes. She's an amazing person. So when Lenore was 5 years old, she used to leave home in her suburb of Chicago and walk to school, which was 15 minutes away. When she got near the school gate, a 10-year-old child would greet her on the side of the road and walk across, dressed as a lollipop man. It was what he was, and walk across the road, right? And then when school ended at whatever it was, 3 p.m., she would leave school on her own, wander around her neighborhood, play with her friends. There was usually kids arranging some softball game. She'd wander around, ride her bike, and eventually go home when she was hungry about 6 p.m. Today, that, by the way, was completely how all children, with almost no exceptions, experienced childhood in the 1960s in the United States. And in fact, throughout almost all of human history, that was normal, right? Now, if you saw a 6-year-old child walking on the street, people would probably call the police. By the time Lenore got to be a mother in New York in the 1990s, childhood had been completely transformed in a way that was unprecedented in human history. Today, only 10% of children ever play outdoors on their own. 10%, right? And I think the average for the ones who do is 10 minutes a week, or some extraordinarily low figure. And Lenore became famous because, so one day her son, Izzy, they went on holiday to Mexico. And there, the kids would just go and run down to the beach every morning and play with each other. And she realized for the first time, her son for a week was experiencing what she had experienced her whole childhood, right? Just exploring the environment, playing spontaneously with other kids. That he'd never had this before. And the first time in his life, in this week in Mexico, she didn't have to rouse him out of bed. He was just running down to that beach. And when they got back to New York, he said to his mother, he was 9, that he wanted to go one day. He wanted to explore a bit of the city on his own. So he wanted his mother to take him to Bloomingdale's. They lived in Queens. To take him to Bloomingdale's in Manhattan, drop him off, and he'd just find his way home. So she thought, that's a good idea. These things build confidence. They planned it all out. They did a little practice. And one day she takes him to Bloomingdale's, and with a little catch in her heart, she leaves him and goes away. And an hour later, he turns up at their front door, like really excited and exhilarated and feeling like he's done a big adult thing. And Lenore, who was a journalist at the time, thought, I'm going to write about this, to encourage other parents. So she writes a little article about it. And the reaction was insane. She gets described as America's worst mom all over the media. She gets described as a mother who, almost like a mother who handed over her child to murderers, was basically how she was described. She's put on one TV show where they put her on alongside a mother whose child had been murdered, right? And Lenore's trying to explain, look, this is a terrible thing that happened to your child, but, the average American child is 3 times more likely to be hit by lightning than to be murdered by a stranger. You wouldn't put me on with a mother whose child had been hit by lightning, right? That would be and say, why did you let your child out, right? This is and the low rate of child murder is not because children are imprisoned, because we've had a big decline in adults being murdered as well. And Lenore just realized that this was a kind of sorry, should we do it one more time? And Lenore realized something had gone really wrong with the culture, that this could happen. that we had gone in such a short period of time from what my parents experienced, almost certainly your parents experienced, almost all humans ever experienced, which was a childhood where they played freely with other children and were not monitored. I mean, a mother who walked her child to school when Lenore was a kid or my parents were kids and waited while they walked through the gate would have been regarded as literally insane, right? It would have been unthinkable, right? No one did that. So she took over a group called Let Grow. People are interested in this should go to letgrow.org, which is about restoring children's freedom. And we can talk about this a bit if you like, but I think this is, and they do amazing work, but this is really important because this change in childhood and how childhood works has profoundly harmed children's ability to pay attention. It's why it's in my book and it's why it's so relevant. And I think there are really 5 ways in which the collapse of play and freedom for children has profoundly damaged children's ability to pay attention. The first is exercise, right? There's really good evidence. Children who run around, who exercise, have better attention. As Professor Joel Nigg, one of the leading experts on children's attention problems, explains, your brain grows more neurons and grows bigger if you can if you can exercise freely, right? So very simple, obvious one. And we've all experienced that, right? Let a child run around and they can come back and they can sit down and focus for a little while, then let them run around again. This is a banal and obvious insight, but one that has been entirely abandoned. Only 73% of elementary schools now have any form of recess, right? Loads of schools were made to sell off their playgrounds. It's a disaster. The second, and Lenore talks about this really well, is the skills that are learned in play. So think about when Lenore was just going out when she was 5 years old in her suburb of Chicago. What was she learning? When she played with the other kids, well, she was learning how to make things happen, right? You've got to persuade the other kids to play the game. She was learning how to take her turn, how to navigate disagreement, how to negotiate disagreement, how to explore the world, how to be brave. You climb the tree a bit, you get a bit scared, how to cope with fear. You do it again, you realize, oh, it's not so bad. A whole banquet of skills. As Dr. Isabel Benkei, who's a brilliant primatologist and expert on play, said to me when I interviewed her in Scotland, you learn to learn through play. Play is the primary technology for how you learn. Now, those skills, we're depriving our children of those skills, and supervising their play doesn't do it, right? Standing over them going, these are the rules for softball and I will enforce them. And no, you broke the rules. And oh, here we go. They don't learn those skills because the kids aren't negotiating it themselves.
It seems fair to say that meta learning, it yields critical thinking, and critical thinking would be a way for an individuals or a society to get us the hell out of the mess that we've created for ourselves.
Totally. And Isabel said, it's particularly insane now because we've got no idea what the world will look like in 20 years. If you think about our schools, what's the point in depriving them of play to stuff their head full of useless facts that won't even apply 20 years from now? It's madness. What you want is for them to be able to think, right? So it's so deeply misguided. The third way in which it degrades attention is it makes them anxious, right? Small things build confidence. And children who are deprived of being able to do even small things, of any form of independence, become profoundly afraid of the world. I think you really see that with younger people at the moment. They're wonderful, they're humane, they're decent, and they're really, really scared. And they have levels of fear that are wildly inappropriate to any dangers they actually face. The fourth difference is about motivation. So there are essentially 2 kinds of human motivation. There's what's called intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is where you do something because you care about it. It matters to you, right? Extrinsic motivation is where you do something for some external reward, like a gold star when you're at school, or, exam results or whatever it might be. And all the evidence shows when you discover something you care about, something that is intrinsically meaningful to you, it is much easier to focus on that thing than if you're doing it for external rewards, right? So a kid who discovers they love, learning about lizards is going to be able to focus on learning about lizards for a long time. A kid that's told you've got to learn these 10 facts about lizards for the test and just shut up and learn it, they're going to focus much less well. And deprived of play, it's much hard and constantly micromanaged. If every hour of the day is micromanaged for these kids, it's just much harder for them to find their intrinsic motivations. It's much harder for them to discover the things they care about, right? How do you discover what you care about if you're constantly managed and told what to do? And the fifth cause, which overlaps a bit with intrinsic motivation, but not entirely, is what's called mastery. Mastery is when you feel good at something. And I interviewed Jan Tannersvang, who's Professor Jan Tannersvang. He's one of the experts on this at Aarhus University in Denmark, who talked a lot to me about, we really deprive our kids of a sense of mastery. You develop a sense of mastery through play, right? When you play, you discover you're good at some things and not good at other things, right? I discovered I was good at persuading other people to do things. Other kids discover they're good at kicking the ball or, punching the other kids or whatever it might be. That's probably not a good thing to discover. But, we all discover different things we're good at, right? Some kids discover they're the kid who can make all the other kids laugh. But again, if you're deprived of play, you're deprived of finding things that you're actually good at outside these very contained environments. And again, when you have a sense of mastery, you're much better able to focus on the things you feel good at. It boosts your sense that you're good at something, right? So I think in this context, we're really depriving kids of the essential ingredients of attention, which I think is deeply related to the fact that there's been an enormous explosion in children being diagnosed with attention problems. For every one child who was diagnosed with ADHD in 1986, when I was 7 years old, there is now 100 children who are given that diagnosis. This is a staggering explosion. Now, some people, their genes make them somewhat more sensitive to these problems, but this is also, as the leading expert on ADHD, who I interviewed, Professor Joel Nigg, said, this is about much more than just genetics. Genes are turned on and off by the environment, right? We have to understand the context in which so many children are struggling to focus and pay attention and deal with those underlying reasons. And one aspect of that is restoring a sense of childhood. And that's what Lenore's work is all about. And you can't just do it with an individual parent. You have to persuade whole groups and schools to begin this process. And I went to the school in some of the schools in Long Island where Lenore's done amazing work on that.
I have a colleague of mine who's a teacher. And I won't mention his name. But we were at a staff meeting one time, and people were talking about the lack of attention, and it just seems like it's rising, and primarily in boys. And what the hell is going on? And he ironically said, he made this big statement with huge movements and said, "I just can't understand why these kids aren't paying attention to the shit that I'm trying to useless shit that I'm throats." So I like that.
Well, that's a really good. I think that's a really actually there's a profound insight in that, which is, we've got to ask as we emerge from the pandemic, does the way our schools work help or hinder the development? There's never a golden age when education was progressive in the United States or Britain. But we've actually seen it move more and more in the direction of depriving education of meaning, dedicating it all towards mindless learning for testing. And there's good evidence that degenerates attention because it's fucking meaningless, right? No Child Left Behind is passed by George W. Bush, introduced by George W. Bush in 2002. In the 4 years that follow, diagnoses of attention problems increased by 23%. Now, why is that? It's because it's really fucking boring to be told meaningless shit, like your friend said. Those kids are not wrong to not want to focus on that shit, right? They're actually very wise to not want to focus. The wisest part of them is the part of them that doesn't want to learn meaningless, regurgitated nonsense, right? Schools don't have to work that way. I spent a lot of time in schools for the book that work in very different ways that nurture children's attention and help to build children's attention. We've got to profoundly redesign the education system. At the moment, if you wanted to design an education system that would deaden children's desire to learn, you'd pretty much design the education system we have now. And that is no fault of teachers who warned at every stage that this is not a good model, right? That is the fault of the politicians responsible for the shitty school system we have. it doesn't have to work this way.
You might know of Lev Vygotsky. He was a popular psychologist in the early 20th century, and I linger on this famous quote that he gave, that a child at play is a head taller than himself. And of course, he meant so many things by that. I think he really did mean all of the things that you listed there for why play is important. But first of all, he meant children, but you can run that through the developmental process of human beings. People, when they're playing, i.e. doing something freely, mind wandering, as you mentioned, lends meaningful pursuits. And so that goes back also to flow states that you talked about. And so I guess the question is, and that you're putting forward, is how do we get ourselves, our culture, all of us, to a place where we can be free, our kids, us as adults, we can be free to let our minds wander, to be creative, to not be so roped into things that are going against our best interest, and knowingly going against our best interests, and the different dimensions of that in play, including forces that be who don't have our best interests in mind. In fact, they have whatever the antithesis of our best interests are in mind, so that we'll keep scrolling. So I don't know if I'm missing so many elements of your work, so people will need to go by the book. I hope. Will you let me know what I've glossed over, if anything?
No, I think you've asked really important questions, Zach. And I think in terms of what we need to do to get to that place you're describing, is there are individual things we can do that I obviously go through in the book. But I think there's two core things. Identify the structural barriers to us achieving that now. We've touched on some of them. There are many more in the book. And then we need to form a movement to take on those forces. Now, that can sound very daunting, but there's an example in my family and the family of almost everyone watching that I think helps us to see how that's possible. So I'm 42 years old. I loved my grandmothers. I knew them really well. When my grandmothers were 42, I think about what the world looked like. So one of them was a Scottish working class woman living in the Scottish tenements, and one of them was a Swiss woman living on a mountain, what would then have been called a peasant, right? Think about my grandmothers. They both left school when they were 13 years old. Their brothers went on to school, but they didn't, because no one cared about girls. My Swiss grandmother was brilliant at drawing. She wanted to be an artist. People told her that was a stupid thing. She'd have to just get married. My Scottish grandmother, went to work in a laundry when she was 13, and then she was a toilet cleaner all her life. When they were the age I am now, in 1962, my Swiss grandmother wasn't even allowed to vote. There were almost no women in the US Congress, the British Parliament, or the Swiss National Assembly. There were no women who ran corporations. There were almost no female police officers. For both of my grandmothers, it was legal for their husbands to rape them. My Swiss grandmother was not allowed to have a job outside the home without the written permission of her husband. Neither of my grandmothers were allowed to have bank accounts in their own names because they were married women, right? There were no domestic violence refuges anywhere in the world. Men controlled literally every institution of power everywhere in the world, and had for as long as those institutions had existed. And then I think about my niece's life, right? My niece is 17. My niece loves to draw like my grandmother did. When my niece said she loved to draw, we said, oh, you should go to art school, right? Even the most crazed misogynist would not suggest, maybe the most crazed misogynist, but even really quite misogynistic people would not say, well, my niece shouldn't be allowed to have a bank account. It should be legal for someone to rape my niece. It should be, it would be, my niece shouldn't be allowed to vote. It would be unthinkable. No one thinks that now, right? No one would say that. What happened? What changed is that lots of women and some sympathetic men, and I apologize to the women listening. I know it's annoying to hear a man mansplain this. Lots of women banded together and they said, we're not going to fucking take this anymore, right? And they fought and they fought and they fought to reclaim their right to their bodies and their lives. And it's obviously, as everyone knows, still an ongoing fight, and we're not even halfway through the journey towards that. But the forces that are currently invading our attention are powerful. They are a hell of a lot less powerful than men were in 1962, right? Men controlled everything in 1962, right? Literally everything. That is not the case today with the forces that want to invade our attention and focus. I would argue that just like we needed and still need a feminist movement for women to reclaim their rights to their bodies and their lives, we need an attention movement to reclaim the rights to our own minds. And that requires a shift in psychology. We are not medieval peasants begging at the court of King Zuckerberg for some crumbs of attention from his table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our minds, and we can take them back if we choose to. But it requires a big collective struggle and a transformation of consciousness. And I think that's already beginning.
You offer solutions like these, and they're sort of vague solutions, but you offer optimism in your book. But then you're above board in saying, I don't know if I figured this out yet. If I had, we would it'd be solved, right? But let me tell you this. A woman who was a mentor of mine when I used to do intervention with kids, a lot of people who were going through the roughest times, there used to be people who were acting violently, they're swearing, causing scenes, and they'd go into her office. And this is like radical of her to do, but she would have radical empathy toward them and say something like, it's loud in there. You can't trust a single adult that you meet. You have so much happening at home. I probably don't even understand all that's going on. You come in here and you're being told to do one thing, then the other. The day's moving so fast. Geez. And the kid would be crying. Yeah, exactly. Say, well, no wonder you hit him. Anyway, my door's open and I'm right here. And just come talk to me if you want to. And it just leave it there. All she did was express his problems. I mean, she just did like a surgical empathy on him and went and saw the world through his eyes. I think that's what you've done in this book. At least I'm sure that's what you're trying to do. And that's how I felt, is that you addressed all of the problems that beset us now and give us a way to express them so that solutions can be generated. And I appreciate your work on that.
Oh, thanks, Hank. That's a lovely way of putting it. I like that. And there are loads of really practical things we can do in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term to solve these problems. This is a very real problem, but I am optimistic because, there really are solutions. I saw them in practice in all sorts of places, from Rio de Janeiro to New Zealand to Long Island, right? There's all these very, and I really, with all my books, I always find most encouraging is I always find people who are pioneering solutions to these problems, right? You mentioned Lenore, who's an amazing example, but there are so many people who I write about in the book all over the world who are pioneering solutions to these problems. So I'm not pessimistic. The answers are out there. And there's something very life affirming about being able to go, oh, here's this person who solved this problem. Everyone come and meet them, and there's always a moment in my books. It's always the moment that most pleases me, which is after the book's been out for a little while, some of the people I write about start to email me and go, oh, people are emailing me to see if they can join. Like I'm sure this will happen with Lenore, for example, or an amazing guy called Andrew Barnes, who pioneered moving workers to a 4-day week on the same amount of pay. It's other people, which profoundly restores their attention. And other people, there'll be a moment when they go, oh, people starting to get in touch with me. And it's that lovely feeling when you feel like you've been like a conduit between people who are doing really good things and people who needed to hear something hopeful. And you kind of go, oh, you want to be hopeful? Here's your source of hope. That to me is always the most pleasing experience of the whole writing process.
It's brilliant. So thank you so much for the book. At the time that people are going to be hearing this, it's 2022. So I should say Happy New Year too in advance.
Hooray.
And look, I know, again, this is something that you do on a much larger scale than I. It's just absolutely exhausting publicizing a book once it's already written. And the fact that you give me a sliver of your time here. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh no, I really admire the work you do, Zach, and we've known each other for quite a long time. I really admire your work, and I'm always thrilled to talk to you. And I meant to say, because my publishers will tase me if I don't say it, anyone who wants any more information about the book can go to stolenfocusbook.com, where they can see where to get the book and the audio book. They can see they can listen for free to audio of lots of the people we've talked about, like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who discovered flow state. Like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who discovered flow states, like Lenore Skenazy, a whole big range of the people, Tristan Harris, loads of people that I talked to for the book. And they can find out what lots of people have said about the book. And I meant to read out a blurb about that, but I can't do it. It's too it's too self-aggrandizing. I'm too British. Yes, hooray.
Anything else? Those will all go in the show notes, and anything else that you can think of, please send it over, and I can do it in the intro and put it in. Thanks again, Johann.
Oh, totally my pleasure. Cheers, Zach.